And welcome to today's webinar on the future retail disruption. So the topic of our session is nothing less than the future of retail. And the slides that you see today are based on a recent report, Future Retail Disruption 2018-19, which we published earlier this month. At the end of the session, you should walk away with an up-to-date view of the future retail landscape, some implications for your business, and ideally some ideas about how to position your business and where to look for opportunities as markets change at really accelerated pace. Of course, you will also have an idea of what you can find in our report on future retail disruption that is available for download on both the Planet Retail and also on the Retail Net Group portal. If you have any questions, there will be a Q&A session at the end of this webinar, so feel free to enter any questions you may have into that chat box. And if I can't get back to all of your questions today, I'll happily do that tomorrow at the very latest. Maybe a few words about us first. So Planet Retail RNG is a retail analytics company focusing on the digitalization of retail. So this is not limited to following the growth of e-commerce, but really comprises the entire transformation of the retail sector, its players and consumers, of course. And we hereby differentiate between online pure play and omni-channel operations. As you can see on the map, we have offices across the US, the UK, Germany, very lately also in Spain, as well as in India. My name is Franziska Schmidt. I'm a retail analyst at Planet Retail RNG in Germany, where we're based in Frankfurt, to be more precise. I'm part of the go-to-market team, where we look at the development of retail markets across the world, so be it national or even specific city markets. We identify key growth hotspots in the world, and at these spots, what are the channels to play in? So where to play, how to win, these are the questions that we work on. Quick look at the table of contents for today. Building on a STEEP framework that I'll explain in a minute, we will look at a selection of disruptors that will change the future of retail. From this, we'll arrive at a sketch of the future world and zoom into a handful of characteristics that we expect to shape the retail landscape of tomorrow. And at the end, I'll highlight some key takeaways before we come to a Q&A session. So what actually is STEEP? STEEP is basically the underlying approach for all analysis we do, and it helps us get an idea of how retail will look like going forward. So STEEP means that we look at key drivers of change across society, technology, economy, industry, and policy, and we assess their impact on the future retail landscape. And this is where we combine our proprietary global data, industry knowledge, and also analyst insight. And today I've picked some key drivers of the change from our Future Retail Disruption report, and I'll quickly run you through a couple of them, and obviously you'll find more of them in the report itself. The first ones are really long-term drivers of social change, but in fact, they're already happening. So the aging of societies and the shrinking of household sizes, and both have already been shaping retail. So 2 things to highlight here: the rapidly rising share of economically dependent seniors in the Western society, and Japan and in China, is really forcing governments to increase income redistribution. And that in turn puts pressure on the working middle class. And that, in turn, again, puts long-term downward pressure on the workforce. So eventually, the middle class is eroding. And over time, this will be increasingly reflected in a divided retail landscape. The other point is the shrinking household sizes, which is due to both aging and more individualistic lifestyles. And that makes the traditional idea of large weekly family shops increasingly absurd for many consumers. Instead, there's a growing tendency for shoppers to shop for smaller quantities and more frequently. And grocers have been reacting to this by investing in smaller store formats. So consumers want proximity and convenience, and this is what retailers have started to give them at the expense of shelf space. The next social driver that I'd like to highlight is the continued shift of consumer spending away from products to experience. So products, of course, are still a growth area in most economies, but a larger and larger share of spending is moving into experience. So retailers are increasingly building experiential elements into their stores. This can happen either in the shape of product curation, supporting an inspiring discovery mission, service, or also through non-retail offerings in the store. For example, most new grocery stores today feature in-store restaurants and some kind of social space in response to the needs of an aging society. So brands have an opportunity here to be part of that experience, and they should really work closely with retailers to enable initiatives. An example is this concept makeup store by L'Oreal in partnership with A.S. Watson in China. The store offers access to makeup artists, and they can give advice and offer their expertise, and consumers can also try out different looks and play around with color cosmetics. So it's really going beyond just purchasing of products. As a third social driver, I'd like to highlight the growing demand for transparency and traceability. And that comes from a growth in deliberate spending. And by deliberate spending, we mean that more consumers than in the past aren't just buying products, they do care about sustainability now. And retailers and brands should position themselves accordingly. So Carrefour's latest initiatives to involve blockchain technology are a great example for a response to this trend. So just this morning, we had the news that Carrefour is now working with that in Italy as well on its private label chicken. So brands with a proactive culture will clearly have an advantage in an environment where shelf space is shrinking. And it's obviously better to be an early mover than to be chased and also driven by events. In technology, e-commerce will be mainly based on mobile technology, and especially in emerging markets with legacy computers, growth in internet access actually equals growth in mobile penetration. And that creates fast-growing digitally addressable populations. For retailers and brands, this means they must provide seamless interaction and easily loadable content that is suitable for less refined smartphones and for limited volume data contracts, because these are particularly often used in these emerging markets. The reward obviously is access to huge numbers of consumers who would not otherwise be addressable. For example, in provincial and rural areas in China, India, and Africa, of course. In our example here, we see that Amazon has already integrated 17,500 Kirana stores in India in 225 cities, and it's adding independence every day. Also on the tech side, smart manufacturing will gain relevance. So this is due to a retail landscape that is increasingly global and shaped by faster and faster trends. Connected manufacturing that responds fast to changing demands as they show up in data will allow brands to accelerate innovation rates. And this, in turn, drives their relevance to on-demand retailers that must serve on-demand consumers with constantly rising expectations. And this kind of manufacturing has been increasingly widespread in the fashion industry, and now we're already beginning to see some CPG brands to adopt it. In our example here in the slide, you see that General Mills has digitized a decent part of its production process, meaning it can produce a larger variety of products faster and in smaller quantities. And that gives it a strong competitive advantage amid limited physical shelf space and rising consumer expectations. And the rise of international protectionism and trade barriers that will force many brands to reconsider their location policies could really be a trigger to adopt more of that smart manufacturing. Other developments in technology are voice and virtual reality glasses, although retail is currently not really the reason why households are buying these. So we at Planet Retail R&D think that the ultimate breakthrough of these technologies will rather be based on the availability of content that is perceived as fun or fascinating. In the case of VR, this could be a live football match from a silent perspective or watching a live concert, but the ongoing availability, retail users will also expand. And this will put then massive pressure on the online visibility of brands. Regarding voice, speech is the most natural way of controlling a machine, and it might become important in replenishment missions in retail. So this means that the rise of voice, even though it's slow at the moment, is an urgent call for brands to manage their customer relationships independently now. So rather than giving this in the hands of retailers who, as I said, shrink shelf space, grow their private label ranges, and reallocate store space to experiences, and who will introduce voice tech at some point. In the economy, one of the world's biggest growth stories is the expansion of digitally addressable populations in emerging markets. And I know I've briefly mentioned this before because this trend is related to the expansion of smartphone availability, but here are some numbers now. So in the next 5 years alone, 270 million consumers will turn digitally addressable in India. So that's just added consumers, and 175 million in China as a result of urbanization, income growth, and growing smartphone penetration. A customer card for the unbanked population can turn consumers addressable as well, as you can see with the Amazon example on the right-hand side. But also integration of rural and countryside stores into digital ecosystems like you see with Alibaba is a great example of how new consumers are addressed. So brands cannot ignore this potential and need to make sure they explain consumer benefits well, as shelf space is very limited in these small countryside shops. So imagine a typical Kirana store sells around 1,000 items. So there's really not a lot of space per category. And there are 12 to 15 million such stores in India where most consumers really do their daily shopping. On the industry side, here's a kind of deep dive into a point that I mentioned earlier, namely the fact that stores are getting smaller, driven by societal shifts. And as retail investment shifts, the fastest growing modern channels are now convenience stores and discount stores. So both small box residential formats and online retail. And all of this reinforces the point that brands will be challenged on visibility. And that makes it important for them to explain their relevance and benefits really well to consumers. And also, as importantly, to retailers, because they will think very carefully about who is worth their increasingly scarce shelf space. So also within e-commerce, we are seeing quite interesting shifts. So who, for example, was giving much attention to 3P marketplaces just 10 years ago? 3P marketplaces are those platforms where retailers and brands can trade for themselves. Today, as you can see in this chart, 3P is the largest e-commerce business model worldwide, and it's driven by platforms like Alibaba. So even Amazon in the US, which is a hybrid between 1P and 3P, is now generating more than half of its sales via 3P. And this provides an opportunity for brands to go directly to consumers. But of course, it also brings a number of operational challenges around pricing, product quality, and service experience. So these are areas that we've done a lot of work on at Planet Retail R&G. So if you need any advice on this, any research and output on this, feel free to reach out. Competition for brands is also increasing via the spread of cross-border e-commerce. And China is really actively encouraging imports of international brands because it sees this as a contribution to improving living standards. And I think we all remember the baby formula scandals in recent years. And have led to massive imports of products across the health and beauty category to China. So this is a great window of opportunity for Western brands, including those from Europe, to really start building a presence in China if they're not already there. And again, it's important for brands to stand out, differentiate, and communicate benefits well because they must be seen by consumers. And for example, on Tmall, you see so many online shops, and yeah, so visibility is definitely a key issue. There's large opportunity, but also large visibility challenges. Finally, some political disruptors that I'd like to mention just briefly. So protectionism and isolationism are a risk in terms of consumer price inflation. And we've seen that with the drop in the pound as a response to the Brexit insecurity in the UK. Another point is global trade wars, and they will disrupt supply chains going forward. So we've already seen that Walmart has suggested to health and beauty suppliers to make themselves more independent from manufacturing China. And this pressure will not ease, and as I mentioned earlier, also opens the opportunities to invest in next generation manufacturing, such as smart production. The future of work is also a giant topic because it has the potential of disrupting middle class spending power significantly on top of aging. So this, of course, involves digitalization a lot. And finally, new legal requirements on health and environmental protection will force business to invest in transparency and traceability. So this is another encouragement to upgrade supply chains over time. So now the question is, what do all these individual drivers of change add up to, and how do they change the future consumer and the future retail landscape? And also, most importantly, what can brands do to win in such a landscape? In the report, we have put together 9 scenarios grouped in 3 different buckets, so consumer, industry, and business. On the consumer side, we expect a world where consumers really are in control and convenience is essential or even key. And consumers are making more and more deliberate decisions about what they buy and from whom. And the industry, we will see physical stores acting as stages for brands, which can take this opportunity to present themselves as physical touchpoints. Online will definitely mean mobile in the future, and especially in emerging markets, but also increasingly in Western economies. And competition won't be just national anymore, but really global as cross-border e-commerce and 3P platforms spread. And finally, under business, we'll see retailers increasingly turn into data-driven ecosystems, and making sense of data will de facto be the new gold. And global brands will adopt to local trends and meet demand increasingly fast with the help of smart manufacturing. So as we don't have too much time today, I've just picked out a couple of the scenarios to give you a flavor of what's available in the report. So in each scenario, we describe what we expect to happen and then also add some points about what it takes to win under these scenarios. So this scenario slide, for example, talks about how connectivity empowers consumers and grows their expectations and forces retailers and brands to adopt services to respond. So these consumers will shop wherever they think they get the most relevant combination of product, experience, and price. And to win in such a scenario, it's essential to have an easy-to-navigate web content, of course mobile-enabled, easily accessible product information, curated assortments that serve local preferences, and fast fulfillment to support the on-demand retailers, because these have to serve an on-demand shopper generation that is now growing into its prime spending years. So millennials becoming even more relevant. This one highlights how convenience is not just a nice to have for retailers and brands, but really a necessary response to consumer demands that are changing as demographics and lifestyle changes the way consumers live and how they shop. So portfolio diversification is really important here. So brands and retailers serve different shopper missions at different points. And smaller and convenient packaging is key, so products are relevant for small box stores and suitable to consumption on the go. Visibility in e-commerce is a must-have as it gets increasingly hard to be seen in an aging, less mobile society that is more experiential and cares much, much less about boring and inconvenient and bulky replenishment trips. And shopper engagement must drive brand recognition in-store and online, so products are considered across channels before they get lost among huge choice of items in each category. And our third example, out of 9 that you'll find in the report, highlights how stores are reallocating space to experiential categories and services, so especially in the big box segment. This puts shelf space under massive pressure for CPGs, but it also creates opportunities for brands to work with retailers and to really use the stores as stages and present themselves to consumers in a way that drives loyalty both in-store and online. This future scenario highlights how retailers increasingly transform into ecosystems that are data-driven and so allow for a 360-degree view on consumers and enable brands to target consumers more precisely than ever before and really create loyalty that makes them impossible for brands to ignore. In fact, digital ecosystem management is one of the 4 winning strategies that we base much of our report output on. So the future winning strategies are the store of the future, as I said, e-commerce and digital ecosystem management, supply chain fulfillment, and shopper engagement and retention. So again, if you're interested in any of these and think this will really help boost your future business performance, just reach out and we're always happy to help. So besides analysis, our future retail report also provides some takeaways by industry segment. And in fact, we cover 4 different retail sectors. So food and beverages, health and beauty, household care and pet care, and consumer electronics. And this is what it looked like for food and beverages. So we start by highlighting key planning concerns and then put them in context. So consumers are getting older and poorer. And that means that along with societies, the retail landscape will divide into a no-frills replenishment segment and an experiential segment that's more upmarket. And brands must build capabilities to play really in both areas, not just one. And then, as we've already discussed, shoppers are turning to residential small box stores. So digital in Western societies means omnichannel. And as there are lots of legacy bricks and mortar infrastructures that retailers will hang on to and try to integrate into O2O ecosystems. Digital platforms will offer the most efficient access to emerging markets, which is a historic opportunity that brands must not ignore. And independence will be one of the fastest growing market segments in the future, as independent traders in emerging markets benefit most directly and most immediately from rising living standards among urbanizing societies and rising middle classes. So if you imagine a township in Africa or favelas in Brazil, even if people have or see income growth, they will still spend most of that in the store they have known for years nearby their homes. So this consumer trust is really structural and long-term, and yeah, it will take some time until they transition to more modern formats. So this is why independent trade might decline in share, but it is definitely still a growth segment. So after highlighting top planning concerns, we then move on to quantify some key opportunities for brands. So for example, discount stores will generate additional sales of 140 billion US dollars worldwide in the next 5 years. So there's a massive call for CPG brands to provide affordable quality lines and up their relevance in the no-frills replenishment segment. Small box sales will grow by a massive $4.6 trillion over the next 5 years in grocery. So brands must make sure they aren't too focused on big box formats, but really invest in relevant products, pack sizes, and price points for neighborhood shopping missions. Omnichannel players will grow their online sales by $210 billion over the next 5 years, showing the importance for both brands to understand retailer requirements and build respective capabilities. The digitally addressable population just of India and China will grow by a massive 444 million people over the next 5 years, which is a call for brands to engage with Asia's digital platforms. And that's not just business to consumer, but also involves the fast-growing business-to-business initiatives. And these are driven by the likes of Alibaba, Flipkart, and Amazon. And finally, looking at emerging markets again, food spending in the BRIC markets alone will grow by $2.2 trillion in the next 5 years. And that makes it clear that brands should avoid over-reliance on the Western markets with their structurally pressured middle classes. And of course, these markets remain important due to their scale and state of development. But when it comes to growth, then brands must really develop multi-channel emerging market initiatives. And that just doesn't mean that you have to have a traditional retail strategy and a big box strategy, but it really must involve all kinds of physical channels and also online. So clearly, taking such opportunities requires high innovation rates, good adaptation to local and fast-changing trends, and distribution and fulfillment capabilities that span a wide range of online and offline channels. Yes, and this is really what we've done in our Future Retail Disruption Report. Of course, in much greater detail there, but yeah, I hope this presentation gave you a quick run and a quick run through that presentation gave you a good glimpse of what's available in the report. And yeah, we now have time for a couple of questions. And yeah, another call out. So if you are a subscriber to our website already, so feel free to download this report. It's available on our sites. And yeah, to prospect clients, if you think that our content will be of value in your business planning, just send an email to info@planetretail.net. So this is the email address. And yeah, so just reach out and we're always happy to help. Okay, so we've got one question on technology. So it says, tech is a huge disruptor, but which in-store technology really helps me drive sales actually? And I think that is a very good question because very often shopper-focused technology is rather gimmicky and it sometimes adds just a little value. So people might play around with it a couple of times and may have their fun, but it doesn't really help drive sales. And yeah, so particularly with AR and VR, this is often the case. So I think what really helps drive sales is, of course, something that needs to be mobile. So I mean, mobile phones are now the third arms and hands of people. And yeah, so for example, electronic shelf labels that really allow you to access like product information and yeah, what we've discussed. So in terms of blockchain, so where is the product actually coming from? How long has it been on its way to the store and that kind of stuff. So if people find that their interests are really well met in the store, they will come back. And then that will definitely help drive sales, and also things that will really help them save time at the checkout process, because people want to spend less and less time queuing up just to pay. So anything that really gives consumers value in terms of product information and helps speed up the shopping process, that would definitely help drive sales. And O2O solutions are obviously a part of this as well. Another question is, do you see digital growth occurring in Africa, specifically in South Africa? Yeah, we do. And I think most of the initiatives are driven by non-African retailers, or Carrefour, for example, is really active in that case. So also in Kenya, I think there was a recent initiative. And in South Africa, Pick n Pay is really active. But yeah, I'm happy to create a few news on that specific topic and send it across. So there's definitely also things happening in Africa, but yeah, of course, to a lesser extent than, say, in North America or China. So it's coming from a really low base. But I think specifically around payment, the continent might be above average innovative, because many people and shoppers are unbanked in that region. So anything that will help them handle money and transfer money and make payments without forcing people to run around with a lot of cash, that will be massively embraced. So another question, you talked about global changes, but which particular market do you see as an innovation hub at the moment? Yeah, very, very good question. So to me, this clearly is China, because social and technological changes are happening particularly fast on a large scale. So aging is happening particularly fast. Urbanization is happening particularly fast. And there are huge cities emerging, and that requires particularly innovative fulfillment and supply chain capabilities. And so autonomous delivery, etc., is really quite vastly developed there, and could rather be an example for us rather than vice versa. And of course, also the consumers are really open to technology and happy to share their data. That, of course, allows for a very different level of speed for retail innovation. So I think in terms of retail innovation, we can definitely learn a lot from China going forward. So yeah, I think time is unfortunately running out. I've seen more questions coming in, so be sure we'll definitely get back to you either today or tomorrow. And yeah, that just leaves me with thanking you for your time. I hope this was interesting to you. And yeah, hope to see you soon in another webinar. And otherwise, enjoy your day. Thank you. Bye.